It was a snap decision. I had to go. So I think really, looking back, I felt numb about it. I had to go out and I had to pretend that I was coming back because we had a man living on the same floor as our apartment, and I knew he was a rotten Vichy chief of police. I knew he was watching us very closely, and I can remember that I went out the door and I called out to Henri, "Back soon?" But of course my dog knew. He started howling. And that's how I left them. I said, "Back soon." And I cried all the way to the Gare Saint-Charles. I cried halfway up to Toulouse. It was a dreadful thing for me, but it had to be done. But it happened so quickly. I didn't have time to say all the things I wanted to say to my husband. I just had to go. It's a dreadful thing to have to do that. And to pretend that you're just going out to do a bit of shopping. Of course, I never saw him again.
The Pyrenees, a natural frontier dividing France and Spain. For the escape network, it was the only corridor into neutral territory. The Germans established a forbidden zone, 20 kilometers from the border, which was heavily patrolled with sentries and dogs. The French border town of S.O.E. was a respite before the arduous crossing.
This is where we used to try and get the airmen who wanted to escape from France into Spain and back to England. So of course it was very important to us all in the network when I was working as a courier. We would bring them near to the frontier as we could, and then the guides would take them on over to Spain, where we hoped the British authorities would pick them up. Although you could cross the Pyrenees today fairly easily, you've got to remember that we had to take the very high peaks and take the rough, the hardest way to get over the Pyrenees. Sometimes we could look down the peaks and we would see the Germans patrolling the Pyrenees with their police dogs, but they never could catch us because the police dogs couldn't climb over the hard rocks. And we always used to wear espadrille like the Spanish guides did, because you don't make any noise going over. It was a very tough crossing. We would walk for 2 hours and then we would sit down and take off our espadrille, put on clean dry socks, rest for 10 minutes, and then we would put back our wet socks on and start again. That was to stop frostbite. It was anything from 47 to 48 hours to 50 hours to get over the military zone into Spain.
In the 2.5 years Nancy worked as a courier, the escape organization assisted over 2,000 evaders into Spain and eventually back to England. But for Nancy, her own escape was to be one of the last through the now famous Garrow-O'Leary escape line.
And I can always remember when I got into Greenock in England, they asked me the funniest question I've ever been asked in my life. They asked me where my passport was. And of course I didn't have a passport.
In London, Nancy waited for Henri to join her, but he had been arrested shortly after her escape and was in the hands of the Gestapo, who were interrogating him about her whereabouts. 6 weeks later, with no news of Henri, she was determined to return to France. Nancy was accepted by Colonel Maurice Buckmaster of the Special Operations Executive to train as a saboteur.
The S.O.E. was secretly formed in 1940 to work with resistant forces in German-occupied Europe. And it was much easier for us, you know, to travel all over France. A woman could get out of a lot of trouble that a man could not, because we were not controlled the way the men were. Well, the first school I went to when I went into training was a place we called We thought it was a funny place. We called it the madhouse. I don't think that impressed S.O.E, but we thought it was a madhouse because everybody was doing something different. I can remember the first day we went through an obstacle course, and we didn't know that each student had different instructions, so it's no good cheating and playing follow the leader. You had to go under rings, through tyres. I can remember at that school I went through a tyre and my pants fell off, much to the amusement of the instructors watching. We did a lot of obstacle courses and make-believe exercises. But I've never been a great sportive person in my life, actually. A great talker, but not a great sport. Our next school was in Scotland, where we were instructed in the handling of explosives, grenades, all kinds of weapons and the art of silent killing. I had never held a revolver in my hand, let alone a Bren gun. As you could imagine, while working as a courier in France, I was not likely to have anything to do with firearms. I would have been arrested and it would have been a one-way trip to Germany.
Hidden in the English countryside in manor houses like Bewley was the security training school. Nancy learned to identify German aircraft, military vehicles, the ranks of officers, and even the divisional flashes on their uniforms. Despite her experience in France, it was a new world.
We had certain codes to use, but we had to have the key to a code. And some people used a verse from the Bible or from Shakespeare. And I'm not a great authority on the Bible nor on Shakespeare. And I thought, well, I'm going to have my own code, which only S.O.E knew and myself, or the person decoding. And mine was very, very simple. And it was, she stood right there in the moonlight fair. The moon shone through her nightie. It lit right on the nipple of her tit, oh, Jesus Christ Almighty. And the man looked quite surprised when I gave him this. And he didn't say a word, but he was surprised. And I said, well, I don't think the Germans will know that. Do you? He said, no, I don't think so. My return to France had not really been the way I had thought it would. The Germans had laid on a reception I will never forget. There we were, huddled in the belly of our Liberator bomber, with my co-saboteur Ebert, bouncing about the sky avoiding the German anti-aircraft guns. I was hardly Hollywood's idea of a glamorous spy.
Drop zone coming up.
Nancy and Hubert were parachuted into central France near Montluçon, then driven to Condelier. Their mission was to meet with the Marquis de Verne, make an assessment not only of its leader Gaspard, but the operational aspects of his army, believed by S.O.E to be between 3,000 to 4,000 men.
Oh, when I first met Gaspard, I hated him. I really hated him. He was an arrogant man. He was terribly rude to us. Obviously felt that all women should be left at home in the kitchen or in the bedroom. Took a poor view of the fact that we had arrived from England, pretended he didn't know we were expected. I disliked him. But at the same time, I felt that if we could get him on our side, he would make a very good contribution towards the liberation of France. Unfortunately, when we got there, our wireless operator, who was a homosexual, but we in those days called it queer, he was queer and he was dilly-dallying on the way. He'd met a chap that he was having a last fling with him, you know, further north. And of course, Gaspard wouldn't have anything to do with us because we had no wireless contact with England. Well, he shoved us off to the other side of the department to where Henri Fournier had a little marquee in a lovely little village called Chodzeg.